I'd like to call this meeting of the Davenport Community School District Committee of the Whole meeting to order. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for that. We will turn this over to Dr. Clips to discuss the calendar and the first presentation.
Thank you, Vice President Hayes. The first point here is the revised academic calendar proposal for this school year. And if you click on that link for that calendar, on January 3rd, we did not have school, as I'm sure you're aware. We have to ensure that all of our teachers and other employee groups, the teachers specifically, have 185 teacher contract days. And so in order to make that up, we are proposing that April 18th, which was originally scheduled as spring break number 2, is converted into a regular student attendance day. That would allow us to make up for that teacher contract day. In addition, it would allow us extra student instructional hours so that if we had additional 2-hour late starts or early dismissals, it would give us an additional 6 hours that we could quote unquote bank so that we would not have to add those days in into the end of the year also. Part of the reasoning is trying to not continue to add days on to the end of the year, which we have had to do in the past. So this is allowing us to keep our last day scheduled as it currently is. So that is the proposal, and I am open for questions.
So that's basically just adding one day, April 18th.
Correct. That's the difference.
Any discussion? Dr. Beck?
Two questions. I think I missed this. Was that originally an in-service day already for teachers?
It was a total day off for all students and teachers. We have in-service still on April 15th, which is a Friday. Yeah. That April 18th, it was initially called spring break number 2. It was a non-student day, non-teacher day completely, and this would make that a regular student and teacher day.
So is this something that we have to have our bargaining units vote and approve an MOU for to address this?
This was shared with our labor management committee and for feedback at the last meeting that we had. At that meeting, I don't believe an MOU would be necessary. At that meeting, they were on board with this idea because they also did not want to make it June 7th or June 8th or June 9th and to extend that school year.
Okay. So just as long as an agreement, it was discussed with the people.
It was discussed with labor management at the last meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional discussion? Any additional information needed for management before this comes before a vote? Okay, moving right.
Madam Vice President.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, I didn't realize you were online with us. Go ahead.
Dr. Clips, real quick, I already know the answer to this, but the labor management group, there is a representative from each bargaining unit on there, correct? So they did have a say in all the discussions and everything?
I don't know if there is a representative from every bargaining group that's on that. I know it's teachers.
Was it the teachers, labor management?
So it's a teacher labor management. So no, not every bargaining group was on labor management.
Okay. What about the other groups then? I mean, did they work that day that was taken off? Do they need to make that up or?
I know that, and I might need to defer to Jamie a little bit on this, that this was a non-contract day for all employee groups. And so if they would, I believe, also would have needed to make that up at the end of the year. So this kind of, that same justification would meet their bargaining unit as well. Is that
okay? That's what I was looking for. So if we don't do this, they'll have to make it up at the end of the year.
correct?
Okay, thank you.
Director Beck?
Just to follow up with that, though, I think I'd like to make sure that this is discussed with all of the bargaining groups who would be affected before we vote on it. I think that would be, I don't want to just surprise somebody with, and I'm not anticipating any issues, but I think especially, I guess another question would be, were there people who still worked the day that we didn't have school, grounds, maintenance, that kind of thing, and how would we handle that? Or was everybody off on January 3rd?
It's not everybody.
Isn't-
No,
do-
it was everybody.
Custodians, don't they work on January 3rd, even though we cancel school?
Yeah, they work.
I don't know.
The custodians probably did. It wasn't, school was canceled because of
Somebody had
the
their-
busing situation, so there were some,
Maintenance and custodian. So how do they handle this day? I mean, obviously, we need them in the buildings, and that typically would have been a day off for them. Just, they get a day off somewhere else?
it would probably be towards the end of the school year, I'd assume. We'd have to look at that.
So a note that I'm taking is to ensure those other groups, those other bargaining groups have been, have their chance for feedback and look into that specific one as far as were there other groups that did have to work that would have to have the opposite effect for.
Yeah, because if it's not a makeup day for them, then we want to make sure that we pay or provide an opportunity for that, a day off later on.
Yep.
Any additional questions? Okay, you can move on, please.
Keep going to the next piece. All right, so the next piece is a Pbis presentation, and I'm going to ask as many of the presenters that can fit up here right now to join would be lovely, and then we'll swap people out, or even I can get out of the way here in a second. Brenda, do you have the keyboard that I could click through?
What's that? I'm not sure.
Oh, there we go. All right. We've got a good group, and I'm excited for this today. In a moment here, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Baxter and Marty Schultz, who are our leads on our Pbis work in our district, and we have some wonderful special guests here with with Sherry Simpson-Schultz, the principal of Wood, and she brought some of her teachers with us today. So I wanted to start off. If this goes. Worked a second ago. All right, we'll go with that. So the outcomes for this presentation today is, one, to review Pbis as our priority initiative in our district, review the actions that we've taken up to this point, learning how we're supporting our buildings in this, and then what most importantly, and what I'm most excited about, is hearing the practitioners that are in our buildings doing this work, hearing their perspectives about this work, and then providing some time for questions. The closer we get to that.
Does it work better? See if you.
A part of this presentation, we've come on a few different occasions to provide some information about Pbis, and we've talked about a lot of data. This is where we are. This is our current state, that number one of the continuous improvement process. But what I've heard from some of the questions that you all have asked, understandably, is, okay, so what are we doing about it? We've seen this data. What's the actions? And that's the intent of this presentation today, is to really kind of give you an overview of our response to the data, what the actions are. So it's step 4 of that process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Marty here, and hopefully when you walk away, you'll have a good understanding of our response to the data and our next steps.
All righty, Marty, you're going to run for me. All right. So I want to kick off this presentation, first of all, is just sort of kind of regrounding you on what is Pbis. So PBIS is what we embed into a multi-tiered system of support, an MTSS system. And PBIS is what we use to teach and manage behavior so that our schools are safe environments for everybody. So this framework is largely about anticipating problems and being proactive and using research-based strategies throughout our day. So any MTSS system is based in 4 questions, whether it's academic or social emotional behavior health. That first question that we ask is, what do we want our students to know and do? Well, related to social emotional behavioral health, we want to teach certain behaviors and social emotional competencies because we know that facilitates learning and helps students grow to be well-adjusted adults. The second question we ask is, how will we know if they have learned what we're teaching? Well, we look at data for that, and we have a lot of data. We have referral data, we have data from our conditions for learning, we have outcome data, we have different screeners that produce data for us. The third question, what do we do if students aren't learning? We have interventions. And the last question, what will we do for students who do learn? Well, we have positive acknowledgments and we provide leadership opportunities. So this is a visual of a healthy MTSS system, and you've probably seen that before. So whether it's academics or social emotional behavior health, this triangle represents that multi-tiered system of support. And that big part of the triangle, tier 1, represents the heart of that work, and that is our universal instruction, the supports, the teaching, the instruction that all students get. And we know that if that's successful or powerful, 80% of our kids will be successful with that. That yellow represents that tier 2, where we know some students are going to need that second dose, up to 15%, and that little top red triangle represents those tier 3 interventions that 5% of our population we know will need that. And you know that crisis response, violence prevention, all that work we did last year runs through this whole system and can be enacted at any time if needed. Now this year, our PBIS implementation has focused on tier 1. That's, again, it's the heart of our work. There's a lot to that, and that's also what this presentation will focus on tonight. So I'm going to move in by just painting a picture of what we've been doing, and I just wanted to note that we've kept the board apprised of this along the way. So August 9th, we came to the board and we did an overview, sort of that reboot presentation of PBIS and what our vision is for our district. And our vision is that all students will feel safe, engaged, and connected in Davenport schools. Right now, we are in the process of coming up with a SMART goal so that we have a way to measure our progress. And that's one of our task teams, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Beginning of October, we came to the board and we did an overview of the conditions for learning. We educated everybody on why we take it, what it means, why it matters, what are those questions, and how does our data compare to the rest of the state. At the end of October, I was back and we did an update on our youth leadership teams. And then in December, we did our first data dig, and we looked at some outcome data on attendance, dropout, and graduation rates. So this helps paint a picture of some of the main actions of our PBIS implementation team that have occurred during the first 6 months of this school year. And first of all, the PBIS implementation team is a broad team with representation from buildings, central office, the AA, so it has different points of view and stakeholders as a member of that team. July is when we really got our act together and brought the team together and started that comprehensive school improvement process, identifying our strengths, current state, making a plan. August was a busy month for our team as we prepared for the BSAT Summit, August 10th, where we bring all district leaders together. And we spent the biggest portion of that time reactivating our CRVP learning from the time before, from last year, and making sure we were ready to hit the ground running with those teams in place for the start of this school year. Additionally, August was busy as we onboarded new teachers and new hires to what does PBIS mean in our school, what are we doing with PBIS, and then all buildings were presented information to take to their teachers to reactivate their crisis response protocols in their building. So during September, we realized that there's a lot to do here, and we discovered it would be more efficient if we had different task teams working on, different aspects of our PBIS implementation to move things forward. So we got that off the ground and started those task teams. And then we went to work staying ahead of the professional learning that we roll out through our leadership academies each month for our district leaders, which in turn make its way back to their schools. So in September, we had a leadership academy around consensus and beliefs, CRVP, building PBIS team guidance, and then we got them caught up on CFL. October, while our task team work is still happening behind the scenes, we really focused to youth leadership team facilitator training, making sure our teams were up and going, and also getting them caught up on CFL. And then December and January was really a fun time for me as a member of the team and an exciting time for us to roll out 8 classroom practices, 8 research-based, high-leverage practices that we want all teachers to be implementing in our school. So they're tier 1 practices. We introduced them 4 at a time. The secondary leadership team is a bit ahead, so they got 4 in December, 4 in January, and we brought our elementary on in January with the first 4 practices, and they'll get part 2 in March. Our elementary teams are juggling 2 priority initiatives, and so are often in Leadership Academy around early literacy. So we are blending in PBIS as we can and as time permits for them. These next 2 slides show our different task teams. So we have a task team that's focusing on behavior incident reporting. What's the difference between a major and minor, and when should we enter it? After looking at the data, we have a hunch. We've realized that our data is not consistent across our buildings, so we're really working to systematize that because the data is what we use to inform our interventions, so we want that to be as consistent as possible. We have a task team that's looking at our universal screeners. Right now, we have a couple of them that we're using. We want, again, that to be consistent across our building. We have a SMART goal task team, which I referenced earlier. That task team is looking at developing and articulating a SMART goal using multiple data sources so we can measure our progress. We have a behavior data platform review committee. We have lots of different ways to look at data in different platforms, and this committee is giving some recommendations for what to use when. This next slide has a few more task teams. Marty's trying to get it to work. There we go. We have a curriculum review committee. We have a social emotional curriculum for students, and we have a committee that's looking at that to make sure it's meeting our needs and ensuring that all students are indeed getting that social emotional curriculum in Davenport schools. Now, these next 3 task teams have stars by them, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in this presentation. We have a task team that's all about Leadership Academy planning, and Marty's going to talk more about that, so I'm not going to steal his show on that. We have a task team that is all about accountability and support. So when we deliver professional development or when we roll out or are systematizing this, how are we supporting administrators and teachers? What's our model for ensuring that? And then there's the conditions of learning task team. Okay, so I'm going to focus just a little. I'm going to circle back around to conditions for learning for you before I hand this over to Marty, because we were here in October, and when we presented this, we shared with the board that all of our staff and youth leadership team, and even the board, voted as to what priority construct do you feel like should be our prioritized construct. And if you recall, there are 5 constructs: physical safety, emotional safety, adult to student relationships, student to student relationships, and boundaries and expectations. If you look at the pie chart on the left, our preschool through 6th grade staff voted, and you can see that nearly 50% of them felt that emotional safety was the most important one, or should have the greatest, our greatest emphasis. At the secondary level, about 1/3 of our staff said that, followed closely by adult to student relationships. And then our youth leadership teams, our student members weighed in, and you can see that 50% of them, nearly 50% of them, felt that emotional safety was the most important prioritized construct. So emotional safety is our district prioritized construct. And we are mostly using that to inform our planning. So knowing that the people have spoken, and many of our students and staff members feel like this is what we need to get our eyes on. How does that inform our long-range plan? And how does what we are currently doing impact that? Because we're getting ready to take the CFL again. We'll be taking it in April. And we really hope that we will improve our score on the emotional safety construct. And if you recall, that was really, really low. It trailed way behind all the other constructs, not only for Davenport schools, but across the state. Oh, one thing I want to add before I turn it over. All of our schools are working on one of these constructs, so BSATs in conjunction with their youth leadership teams. And I saw Tammy Conrad, principal from Washington, back there, and I know that they are working on student-to-student relationships. And we've told buildings and youth leadership team facilitators that don't stop the good work you're doing on that construct, on those student-student relationships. Because we know if we improve student-to-student relationships, emotional safety is going to improve as well. If we have a school doing great work on boundaries and expectations, and that's their focus right now, keep going, because that will also improve emotional safety if our boundaries and expectations are clearly articulated. So we did ask them to stay the course, but keep that emotional safety in mind while we're working and while we're planning forward. And again, they do impact each other. It's like all, a rising tide raises all ships with these constructs being connected. Okay, Marty.
All right. I just wanted to take a few minutes to give you an overview of, like Lisa said, the work that we've done at our leadership academies in December and January and how that has supported our Pbis work. So the summary on this page gives you kind of an idea of our learning objectives for our December and January leadership academies. And I just want to briefly go over this to give you a sense of the direction we're headed in supporting our teachers and students. And there's 2 things on this list that I want to call your attention to. The first is, if you see the last bullet, or I guess 3 bullets there, you'll notice that it contains some of what I call like the acronym soup that we as educators have had to get familiar with over the last several years. We'd received a request from some of our principals that it would be useful to review and bring clarity to some of those topics, and specifically how all of those fit together to support our work in Davenport schools. And so we devised an activity where we challenged those teams from the buildings to create a graphic depiction of how each of those concepts interrelate. And those posters are what you see hanging around the back of the room here. So you can tell which schools brought their art teachers with them. But we had a lot of fun doing it. And it really is important because we have introduced so much to our building leaders. There have been so many initiatives over the last 5 to 7 years. So not only the concept of multi-tiered systems of support, which we didn't even have in education 15 years ago, but also social emotional behavioral health, crisis response, violence prevention, cultural and linguistically responsive pedagogy, positive behavioral interventions and supports, the tiered fidelity inventory that measures our PBIS systems, the conditions for learning survey, and our youth leadership teams. That's what all of those stand for. So if you would like any more clarity on those, we'd be happy to ask those in the follow-up here. The other thing I want to point out here is that bolded highlight, the objective to gain a shared understanding of Tier 1 evidence-based classroom practices that create the conditions for learning. And that's what I'm going to dive in a little deeper with you on right now. The world's worst.
Maybe I'll take it back over to Brenda and she can.
Yeah,
pass it along.
could you? Thank you, Jake. I'm just going to keep going on. On the next slide, you're going to see a list of 8 evidence-based classroom practices. And specifically, those are practices that are represented in a set of rubrics that I created and vetted through our TLCS innovators over the last 1.5 to 2 years. Each rubric that you see listed there describes a high-functioning classroom through the lens of one feature or concept. These rubrics were designed to be used as coaching tools for our TLCS innovators, building administrators, or for individual teachers or teacher teams to use as a starting point when trying to address specific challenges in their classrooms. They allow our teachers to assess where they are in implementing a given practice and to identify a meaningful, achievable next step that they can take to add their practice. But I want to be clear with you that while we wrote the rubrics that we're going to show you in-house, we did not create the research behind those rubrics, and we didn't organize them into these categories. The rubrics are based on and aligned with more than 30 years of research that the Center on PBIS organizes into a guidance document that they call Supporting and Responding to Students' Social, Emotional, and Behavioral Needs. Could you go to the next slide, Brenda? This is a snapshot from that document, which was actually just revised and republished in January. So you'll see that some of the names of the categories have changed subtly. For example, the concept of settings from the previous slide has now been clarified as design a safe environment. But the new revision of this document maintains the research that our rubrics are based on. And while it does capture new research on successful teaching practices that support academic achievement for all learners. So for example, this new document now specifically references the work of Dr. Shiraki Holly, who actually provided several days worth of professional development in our district several years ago. So these practices were selected, the 8 rubrics, because they align with research on high-functioning classrooms. Next slide, Brenda. This is an example of one of those rubrics. This is the rubric that describes the use of routines in the classroom to facilitate learning. So as you can see, a teacher or a teacher coach could use this to identify where their current practice falls along 3 strands. So on this rubric, it's predictability, efficiency, and instruction. And then if the teacher needs to, they could determine next steps to move their practice forward. Giving our school leaders a shared understanding of these classroom practices is essential to ensuring that all students feel safe, engaged, welcome, and involved in their learning in every building in Davenport. And interrogating these practices and determining individual next steps that each building team could take to better support their teachers' development were the primary focus of our recent leadership academies. And I also want to be very clear with you all that there are teachers all over this district who are already exemplary practitioners in each of these rubrics. PBIS classroom practices are not abstract or novel ideas that a PhD researcher is trying to impose on teachers. Rather, researchers over the last several decades have studied classrooms that produce academic and social success for all learners and found the common threads of practice between those teachers. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about Tier 1 classroom practices. Next slide, Brenda. And so before I turn this over to Wood Intermediate, just one last note about those rubrics. And this is a slide that was shared directly with principals at Leadership Academy. So again, these rubrics were offered as tools for our leaders to use to improve their school buildings and their classrooms. But just like any tool, there are a wide variety of uses for a tool, and they're not always appropriate. So different buildings have different needs, and we gave administrators the flexibility to determine how best to use these rubrics in their buildings. And so you can see just some of the ways they might use those here. But this was not a district mandate of you must do a walkthrough or you must assess teachers, you must give a score. We really wanted to leave this flexible to our building leaders. And so on that note, I'd like to cede the floor to Principal Schultz and our teachers from Wood, and they're going to give you an example of how one of our buildings has started to put these tools into practice.
So my name is Sherry Simpson Schultz. I'm the principal at Wood, and I have brought with me 4 teachers that I will introduce to you, and then I will let them share with you just the work that we're doing at Wood and how we're using PBIS and our steps and kind of where we're at. Wood has been doing, our initial year with PBIS was actually 2013, and the work that we're doing this year on PBIS has been an excellent opportunity for us, and they will share that. These teachers volunteered to come. They were not voluntold. They were not arm twisted. I simply put out that the board would like to hear more about how we're implementing PBIS. They are model teachers at Wood, and I'm delighted to introduce them to you. So they do have a little presentation in order, but starting over there is Kelly Rolfe. She's an art teacher at Wood. This is Sarah Davison. She is a special education teacher who does most of her co-teaching in language arts. I think maybe has done math in the past. Math, science, and social studies. I also have Angela Thomas. She is a science teacher. And do you have social studies this year too? Just science? She can teach social studies. And I have Colin Carstens who teaches math. So we have quite an eclectic group of all the subject areas and disciplines. But I'm going to let them take it off. I believe Sarah's starting.
Thank you so much for letting us come and present to you. I just want to let you know that Wood is extremely proud that in the first semester, 80% of our students have 0 to 1 referrals for the first semester. That does demonstrate that the MTSS process is working at Wood Intermediate. And if you take a look up at the projector for me, you can see that we do have a kickoff PowerPoint presentation. That starts day number 1 at Wood Intermediate. I was debating on whether or not what was the most important of the kickoff PowerPoint presentation. And I think probably the most important thing that you see in the first day is that the behavior expectations from all the teachers is exactly the same. The consistency is there. Wood rocks, responsible, organized, cooperative, and keep safe is all the same. It's the same language. It's presented in every single classroom on the first day of school to a Wood student. They see the same language. They see each of the teachers saying the exact same thing about our mission, vision, and values. Now, the second part of this is the teacher buy-in. If you take a look at the mission, vision, and values statement, that is a multi-day, multi-debate of the entire Wood faculty. It was a very long process. Actually getting to reminisce with my colleagues about this, they would point out conversations that we had, what was the most important, what did we want Wood students to walk away with. But that is the first thing that students at Wood see. Once you go from there, you can see Wood rocks, as Ms. Rolfe's classroom expectations are worded in her own format: responsible, organized, cooperative, and keep safe. That is a chance for the teachers to almost differentiate what their Wood rocks looks like in their classroom. From there, you can see also the Wood rocks rules. Those were like voted on. Those are the most needed ones that we knew Wood students come in needing. So it's not like Sherry came to us and said, this is how we're going to do it. This is all teacher created. We decided what we liked from Boys Town. We took stuff that we liked from the mission, vision, and values, which we all created. And these are not posters. Don't look at them like poster decorations. These are actually tools. They're used to retrain inappropriate behavior. They go back. This is why I'm giving you a referral if you do get a referral. If you get a phone call home, we always refer to these behavior posters. This is the language that they are all seeing collectively throughout the building. And this is the other thing. With the mission, vision, and values being built by the teachers, they were long, hard conversations, but it really built like collective accountability for what we're putting in front of our students.
Turn your mic off.
I'm Mrs. Rolfe, and I'm going to talk about the overall PBIS with the teachers and what we use in the classroom. So we all do the PBIS at Wood, but each teacher individualizes their own PBIS system so it works in their classroom. In that link, you don't have to click on it, but in that link, it showcases all the different ways of doing PBIS while still all of us incorporating the same things of Wood Rock. So we all incorporate the responsible, organized, cooperative, and keep safe, but we each individualize it to get the students into it for that specific subject. So like art is going to be entirely different, my topic, than math. So we individualize it all around Wood Rocks. And you can see based off of those pictures just a few examples like periodic wars in science, teacher versus student. We've got like a puzzle war and like a Scrabble and then dojo. Those are just a few different examples. And this PBIS showcase is available for any new teacher that comes into the building who has no idea what this is or how to start this up. It gives them multiple different variations of how to incorporate it into their room instead of stuck on one thing. Or a teacher who has taught for 10 years and they're just kind of over their way and they want a new way of teaching something. It gives them a whole different list of something they could try out. But it is all of us still working around Wood Rocks. And this next couple slides is going to showcase two different teachers as to how they incorporate their own PBIS. And I'll lead that to Mr. Karstens.
I'm Mr. Karstens. This is the PBIS system that I use in my classroom. It's called Puzzle Wars. So we focus on four main goals with appropriate language, being respectful, being on task, and bringing your correct supplies. All of that stuff is relating back to our Wood Rocks as well. But the students are able to earn a reward of their choice if they are able to fill their puzzle. They can get one of those pieces each day. We started to do it that they had to have it by the end of the week, but being able to change and realize that that wasn't going to work because if the students realized they couldn't finish their goal, you lost the buy-in from the students there. So we've extended it to it's just whenever they do finish it. It doesn't have to be on a Friday. It could be on a Wednesday. But that's just something that we were able to adapt to throughout the year. But as you can see, like this works really well in my classroom. But as Kelly just said, this might not be something that works well in her room. So she's able to individualize her own PBIS system. But even though she may have a different system, it's working towards a common goal. And that's with every single teacher in our building. We're all working towards that common goal of being responsible, organized, cooperative, and keeping safe. And I think that's what really helps us be successful at Wood is that no matter where the students are going, although they may have a new PBIS system in the classroom, they know the expectations and they know what they need to be doing in the classroom. So I will send it back to Mrs. Rolfe here so that she can talk about hers again.
So in my system, in my classroom of art, I have found it to be the best way to give them two different styles. So I reward them individually with individual dojo points. And I have that giant poster above the whiteboard in my classroom that shows them how they earn points, how they lose points, and then what they get to buy with their points on Fridays. And a lot of my rewards is geared toward art, mainly due to a lot of my students don't have the supplies that they need. So the dojo points allows them to spend their points on materials that they would want for art class. Besides the individual dojo points that they can receive, I also give out class reward, which is what I call the Fun Friday color wheel. That's what you see, all those little white circles. When their color wheel is full, they get a Fun Friday, and that is voted upon with the class, whether that's a free Chromebook day where they get to play games with their friends or a class movie and snack day. If it's nice out, generally they'll vote to go outside and run around since they don't get that opportunity a lot. But they only get a wedge for their color wheel if they are showing all of the PBIS responsible, organized, cooperative, and keep safe in my classroom based off of my poster that you can kind of see hidden back there. But all of that is listed on that and we go over that. And it is told, thank you guys for arriving on time. Thank you for having your materials. Thank you for doing your project. And thank you for cleaning up and putting all of your stuff away. You were Wood Rocks today. You've earned a wedge for your color wheel. So that's how it works in my classroom. And then it also incorporates learning the colors of the color wheel still. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Mrs. Thomas.
I'm going to join in real quick on what Kelly was just saying. I know she mentioned it at the beginning, but we were talking to a few new teachers this year, and they said how helpful having access to this link and all of the different things were coming into the school year, maybe not having a PBIS system when they were student teaching or the school that they were coming from. So I know she had mentioned that, but I wanted to say how I think it truly helps because, you know, as a teacher, we all can take something and run with it, and sharing our ideas is one of the most powerful things of being a teacher. And being able to share all these different PBIS systems, I think, has really helped our whole staff, whether you've been teaching for 20 years or you're brand new to the building.
All right, my name is Mrs. Thomas, and our first rubric that we looked at is our routines, and what we did is at PD, and we looked at and we decided that we have 40 to 50 routines in a classroom, and so we decided to kind of look at those routines again, and especially if you've been here for a while, because I've been teaching for about 7 years, and just like looking back and versus a new teacher, looking at those different routines, and maybe we can change that up in our classroom. And so what we did was we collaborated together with our colleagues sitting in groups, and we just discussed, we looked at the rubric and discussed where are we at. So are we at 3, are we at 2, like where could we fix, or what are our barriers, or what is something that we can do as a teacher to better our classroom and to go along with the PBIS. And so some things that we looked at are some things that we can change in our classroom for routines. So for example, we looked at coming into the classroom, how do students come into the classroom? We also looked at how do they get their supplies? Do they come in, do they do bell work? How do they get their pencil? So one thing that I looked at and I tried to change was having teacher helpers. So if I was busy, like on a phone call or something, we had a teacher helper that can help with the students, like pass back papers, or if a teacher is gone, then they can kind of help the sub that's in the classroom, kind of show them how the routines are in the classroom and show them how it's supposed to work. And so we came and we did our routine. We practiced our routine that we chose that we wanted to change in our classroom. We collaborated with a partner, kind of holding each other accountable, deciding on, okay, I'm doing this, how is it going? Is it working, is it not? And we came back on February 2nd, we also talked and we said, okay, did this work, or would I do something different next time? And so that's what we did with this. And then our next step was to do the expectations rubric. And we unpacked the expectation matrix, and we looked at our number of referrals to see if our routines and those expectations could help with those referrals. So that's what we did overall.
To kind of jump on what she was just talking about, the expectations rubric that we just went over, that really helped me as a teacher to go over that and see that rubric, especially because the expectations, again, in my room is going to look entirely different in a different room because I have all of the art supplies and all of that compared to calculators and all of that kinds of stuff. So when I was going over the expectations, it really helped me figure out, okay, what can I change to help this specific topic of behavior in the art room? I noticed a lot of my referrals were being written up about like inappropriate behavior in the room of constantly being out of their seat. And that was mainly due to them not raising their hand. And I was like, okay, well, that's an expectation. I now need to go over and set in place, how do I fix that? So talking that over with my partner, I then came up with a solution of going back over with the students of first off, raising your hand. If I haven't seen your hand after so long, you need to put your name on the list on the board, and I will make sure to get to you that it's a visual right there for me, or sign up on the list on my desk right when you come into class. Like if you're more of a shy student, you don't want your hand noticed in front of the entire class that you need that help, at least I know that you need that help and I will get to you as soon as I can. That rubric really just helped put into like focus for me, what can I do to help these students who just need further explanation of the expectations in my class. In art, sometimes I allow them to work with a partner if they're having struggles on drawing a specific topic and they practice together. Other days, they're to work independently at their desk and not be walking around. So I think as a teacher, it was kind of a viewpoint for me of okay, how do they know what the expectation is? Like, I know what it is, but how do they know? So I kind of stole the idea from one of my teachers at my building. They have a poster up on their whiteboard as to what the behavior expectation is. Are they allowed to work with a partner? They have that on the board, work with a partner day. Can you go to your Chromebook and look up examples? They have that on the board. Is it individual work time? They have it on the board. So where we have the stop sign for the Chromebook, they have it more or less for behavior as well. So that really helped me, and I'm going to create a poster for my board as well.
And just to piggyback off that as well, Ms. Davison talked about it at the beginning when she was talking about our Wood Rocks posters. And we go through that kickoff PowerPoint at the beginning of the year. And so the students know all the expectations, day 1, day 2, day 3. You know, every single teacher is just hammering home those expectations. But then I think my biggest thing, and I think some of the other teachers after talking with them, was that we just assume that they know those expectations are the same when we're in quarter 2, but we haven't mentioned them since, you know, that first week of school. So I think the biggest thing is we need to continue to go back and talk about our expectations throughout the year and make sure that they understand them. My biggest one that I realized was at the beginning of the year, we talk about not lining up at the door, you know, when the bell's about to ring. And then we get to quarter 2 and we finish up 2 minutes early and the whole class is over by the door. And it's because I haven't brought back that expectation and reminded the students of the expectation. We just talked about it week 1 and we moved on. But being able to just hold each other accountable, and that's one thing that I was able to talk to my colleagues about, and making sure that I'm still touching base with the expectations we had from the beginning of the school year.
And this is my first year teaching 7th graders that came from an elementary to a junior high. So I learned that you have to teach these students the different skills because they don't have those skills because they were in elementary school and now they're in a junior high. And so it's a different expectation going to different classes. And so we have to teach all of these routines. So one of the things that I did at the beginning of the year is I had them go through and show them where everything is in my classroom because I teach a science classroom. And so they could see where everything is and the expectations for that as well. So that's kind of what we did with the routines. And like he said before, kind of going back in every quarter, we need to kind of review all of those too.
I think that finishes up our part.
Can you go to the next slide, please, Brenda? And one more. And before I get into this, wow, thank you. It just makes me so happy. And you guys, I mean, that's impressive. Thank you, all of you, for that work. Because we present stuff and then I'm going to get into some of the follow-up. But it is just so encouraging to see that in practice. And I know that's where really the hard work is in the classroom with the students in front of you. And I hope, too, that in listening to them talk, it really shows you that what PBS is a framework because they made it all about wood and how it works in an art class and a science class. It's not like, here's the thing. It's like, here's the framework, here's the philosophy, and now you make it work with your building personality. And that's just a wonderful example of that. So we provide the professional learning here in this building. And then what we've done is created implementation support visits. And these visits are follow-ups to the Leadership Academy. And so what you see across the top of the page is those same professional learning community questions. What do we want buildings to know and be able to do? Which is what the learning targets are for those Leadership Academies. So we talked about how you make all the alphabet soup, how does that all fit together? What the consensus and beliefs, these are building and staff, fundamentally believe the work that we're doing. And then of course the specifics about these routines and these practices in the classroom. So after a Leadership Academy, each region, so I visit with a small team to the Central Region schools. I just had my one from Sudlow earlier today. And again, we kind of go through. So tell me where you are. What can we do as a district team to support you in reaching these goals? So these visits are not a checkbox to trying to catch people making mistakes, but tell me what's going on and what can we do to meet the needs of your specific building. And so that's what these implementation visits. We actually do this for our early literacy for elementaries and for our Pbis at our secondaries. In addition to these, Then we also, Dr. Barney and Mr. Driscoll and myself follow up with principals biweekly for one-on-one visits to say, okay, tell me more, what else is going on in addition to other pieces to that. So those visits, it's not just cut off like, here's the stuff, good luck, but here's the learning. We're going to come in a couple weeks and learn more about how it's working at Wood or at Sudlow or at Central or wherever that might be. And then if there's specific pieces after that, we have those one-on-one follow-ups with principals. So that's that support system. Can you go to the next slide, Brenda? I think we're closing in. And so that is the quick overview of what we've been doing, what the great work that we've been doing, and how we support buildings in implementing some of those pieces. So we'll open that up for questions.
Dr. Beck?
You know I got questions. So first of all, thank you guys so much for coming and sharing. And I can hear how excited you are about this, and that's wonderful. So I have, I guess, sort of a philosophical question for you all. As a parent, one of the things that used to drive me crazy was my student was consistently not able to meet those individual expectations, right? And back when my son was even younger, there was still the visible like scale for each individual student in the classroom. And I'm really happy to see that that's not the case in terms of like, everybody can see that Johnny is on red today, But I guess what happens when, so I appreciate the focus on the whole class because that encourages the students to all sort of monitor each other and self-monitor as a group. But what happens when there's one or two kids in a classroom who just don't get those, I'm sure each of you probably has a slightly different way of approaching it, but, you've got one or two kids in the classroom that just don't seem to get some of these things or are going to just need a lot more work than others.
I don't mind taking the floor on that one. I call it the hallway talk at Wood. So if we don't know what to do, we literally are in the hallway and we're talking to our colleagues constantly. Oh, I have this person. We have grade level teams. We bring concerns together, and it's really a collaborative team when we're trying to figure out something that will work. Not every single, you'll start out like what Mr. Carson said. It wasn't working with the puzzles, trying to get all the puzzle pieces in a week, and he's like, scrap this, we're going to have to try this. And that's what we're very much like at Wood. If it's not working, we can tell right away, and we come together as a team to solve the problem. So we're not going to leave somebody behind. Our mission is all students are going to be prepared to be successful, period.
Okay, so I guess in terms of like the class reward or whatever, it's fantastic, and I would hope that the whole class would earn the reward, but there's a chance that there's that one kid who ends up maybe not exhibiting the behavior you want. Does that hold back the whole class, or?
So in my class, I have a co-teacher. So we are able to, if the class has earned their reward, or maybe, there's a couple students who have not earned the reward or have pulled the class back, but 90% of the class deserves that reward. We're able to kind of split up. So she can take a few students, and it can just be a reteach time, or it can be a time to like catch up on those basic skills that maybe they need to extra work on. Or, maybe it's Johnny, let's just say, who is excelled in everything right now, and we have an extra worksheet that we can just push him to challenge him a little more, but they can go in the other room, and that way it's not even said like, hey, you didn't earn the reward, but hey, you're going to get some extra practice here, and you're going to go with my co-teacher and work with her for a little bit, or I'll go and she'll stay in the room. So that's one way that we have found a way to still get the kids their classroom reward when they earn it for their Pbis system, and still get some extra instruction for those kids that maybe need some extra work or just need to go practice a little bit because they didn't earn their reward for the day.
I would also say that we've only presented right here the work that we're doing on routines and expectations, but one of the slides showed another 6 rubrics. So there's preventative prompts, there's corrections, there's a whole array of things that we can do to work with students. But for the most part, they do work very hard to not put somebody on the outside or leave them out or that type of thing. I generally see the full class earning the reward.
If I could jump in real quick too. Brenda, if you could backtrack to that list just to give like the nerdy wonky version of like to reinforce what they're talking about. So like or even this one is fine. You want to stay here. So technically like the rewards they're talking about would be called like a group contingency versus an individual contingency. So one is like an individual reward, the other is a group reward. And with group contingencies, you don't necessarily deny the reward. It might get delayed based on a handful of students doing that. I think it's also important, like she mentioned, the rubrics that we have, where one of those is specifically just about error correction. Like what's the respectful, humane way that you can correct a student's behavior without, like the example you mentioned of the color chart, the clip charts, that there's a lot of research about how those just shame kids. It makes them feel disconnected and pushes them away. And it's so Jake actually sent an email out district-wide 2 years ago to be like, if you still have those in your building, they have to come down now. So yeah, but I love your question because you're getting at like how thorny and gray like the issue of behavior is, because so many kids come with different skills. And so we have a choice, like what are the ways that we can nudge students towards the correct behavior without pushing them away? And I think for too long, and this isn't unique to Davenport, this was education in general, the tool we had was removal, right? So your behavior doesn't cut it, we remove you. And we remove you long enough, and now you're missing instruction, so now your academics goes down. And now you're less involved, and you're less engaged, and then we have to remove you more because your behavior is worse. And you end up with kids that end up dropping out of school. And the reality is those people grow up, and they have kids, and they send their kids back to school, and now they have even fewer skills for us to work with. So it's really about trying to like find that sweet spot of like, we're not trying to bend over backwards and just incentivize and give out treats and stuff like that. But it's always, what's the educational approach? How do we keep kids connected and engaged without pushing them away from our classrooms?
I have something to add. So I'm a senior at West, and in middle school and elementary school, my teachers used those incentive devices and stuff in the classrooms. But like, what happens when they come to high school and we don't have days to do, go on your Chromebook for half the block because they're an hour and a half, so that's a lot of instructional time. So like, what do you do about that when you don't have time just to watch a movie in class, or your days are so already narrowed with curriculum? When would you have time to do stuff like that?
Well, I would ask, so what does West do? Because I know West has a Pbis system. They have the West Highway. Do they have group rewards and contingencies for you guys? Because the expectation just changes as kids get older, right? Yeah. We expect that people can handle a little bit longer engagement in their classrooms. And so what's your experience been so far?
I know that all my teachers, I know the West Highway. We talk about it every single morning with the pledge. It's very like put into our brains. We all pretty much know it. It's just we don't have rewards like that for doing things like that I noticed. Right. But I'm just wondering, since like, so we have like the 8th graders coming in as freshmen, they're used to getting these rewards. They're used to getting like rewards, not just, hey, good job on your homework. Like, what are you going to do about that when they're like expecting it and they're not getting it? Because that's not what it's like.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, sometimes those rewards turn into more of affirmations or recognition or acknowledgement as you get older. So sometimes that is embedded into your announcements or classroom celebrations instead of it being a tangible thing.
Yeah, I would just make sure that that's a thing for 8th graders, because you don't want them like coming and expecting things and behaving inappropriately because they want those things and they think that this is going to happen if they act correctly in class.
Thank you.
It's a really great observation. I like what you said too. I'll air something else. There's something really interesting. What you're getting at, right, is that the real difference between an 8th grader and a 9th grader is 2 months, right? And so that can be kind of for our high school teachers who are used to teaching with kids that more and more look like adults and act like adults. It can be a hard stretch to say, hey, remember these kids were 8th graders a little while ago. They just came out of middle school. They need a little bit more support. But definitely, I mean, the goal is that we do try to fade that support out. And what I'm hearing you say is we maybe need to do a better job of either fading that out sooner in 8th grade or adding a little bit more support in the early years of high school so that it's not like such a
Yeah, I really like all the classroom incentives. I think it works really well with like elementary and middle school, at least for my experience. It's just make it not so hard on those high school teachers. When you have all these kids coming in, they expect things and they're just not getting it because that's not how it works at that level. Just make sure you have all your areas covered, how the high school teachers feel. Maybe they could still like incentives and stuff, but they don't have, I know that we're always like cramming curriculum in, so you need to make sure you have time for stuff like that. So I think it's great, just make sure it fits.
And the affirmations is one of the rubrics that high schools might decide to work on.
Yeah.
And they would be able to rate themselves on that. But
Yeah.
that'll be fun for Marty and I to keep an eye on.
Yeah, just to implement it a little bit earlier so they know.
Sure. Thank you.
Can I jump in from a sidebar? Thank you to our student board member. And what I would like to point out to the entire board is where one of the things they talked about is those visits to the building, because it's not a one and done where we say, hey, here's how you do PBIS, now go do it. Rather, there is a leadership academy where the framework is developed, and then Wood takes it and says, how are we going to do it in West and North and Monroe and Garfield and all the other places? And then these conversations absolutely must happen, and the youth leadership team, because you hear how much power is in the voice of our students. They are the people who need to be positively impacted by this. So the youth leadership teams exist at our buildings, and it might not be Bree, it may be a different student that is sitting in that, but all of our students have a very important perspective, and so that exists. And the members at your school, for example, are Miss O'Hare. She is the facilitator of that group, and she sits on the PBIS committee. So there are so many ways to connect the points of what's going on to make sure that that exact thing is continually coming back to the surface. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to point out the youth leadership team that I'm not sure that we've talked enough about.
The other thing that I would mention, and I think it's important you bring that up, but we're constantly adjusting and adapting and changing. So when we get kids in 7th grade, they've just left elementary and they're losing recess. And, so we're trying to, what can we find that will teach them to be responsible, organized, cooperative, and keep safe? And what does it take and what does it not take? Our goal isn't, honestly, we've talked a lot about rewards, but it isn't so much about rewards as it is learning the appropriate behavior and moving on and that type of thing. It constantly ebb and flows to get it to be what we need it to be to get our students to learn, which is the same thing that the West teachers are doing. And you're moving on. We all earn rewards, all right? I work for a paycheck, right? Sometimes. That's not the sole reason, but we all are rewarded for the work that we do in some way, shape, or form. I do have teachers that the reward in their classroom is a pat on the back and good job. It works in that classroom with that group of kids, with that clientele, but it's a constant ebb and flow. The PBIS showcase would show you just the variety of differences in ways teachers are showing positive acknowledgement for the behavior. And maybe we abuse the word reward. It's more of, you've done a really good job, you've been cooperative, you've been responsible, you've used appropriate voice tone. It's about teaching behavior and how do we get there.
Sorry to add one other thing. Really just to reconfirm what Sherry was saying, it's not, there are buildings that you can go to in the state of Iowa that if you ask them what PBIS is, they're like, oh, that's the tickets thing, right? It's like you just, oh, whoop, I did something, here's a ticket. And I know that the principal, Mr. Johnson, who used to be your associate at Williams, did an activity with his staff recently that they shared with us where they came in for a staff meeting, and as the teachers were entering the library, he just gave tickets out randomly to teachers. He didn't say why. He said, here. And then once they all sat down and got quiet, he said, hey, who can figure out why I gave you tickets when you walked in? And I think the real reason is he looked for like who was wearing tennis shoes or something like that, but he never said it. But, the teachers guess this, that, and the other. And one of the teachers finally said, oh, well, you like those teachers more than you like the rest of us. So it really is important that when we're doing that it's a positive acknowledgement. It's saying, I saw that you did this thing that is useful to you as a student, that builds your academic and social emotional skills, and I'm noticing that you did that, and I want you to know that I saw it. Because you're right, if we're just handing out tickets and doing parties, and we're not being specific about our expectations and why we're doing those things, it doesn't have the effect we want, and it can push some students further out.
Any additional questions? Dr. Gordon?
Thanks for this whole presentation. It's been really nice. I do have a question about how this works on not just the tier 1 level, but tier 2 and 3 as well for students with IEPs, because I know based on conversations I've had in the past and things I've seen in the past that there is some confusion in a lot of buildings about, can kids on IEPs get referrals? Can they have behavior interventions? So like, I know that tier 1 is for everybody, and when kids with IEPs, they're part of the, the universal. My brain is not working apparently Monday night, but you know what I'm saying. So how does this work for students on IEPs? How do we generalize that for them without taking away from their individual plans?
That's your world. So yes, students that do have IEPs get referrals, and they may have a deficit in their reading, their writing, their math. That does not exempt them from their behavior. Everybody has the behavior expectations. And even if you do have an IEP goal in the area of behavior, you still are expected to follow responsible, organized, cooperative, keep safe. It depends on what level you're at, where are you at with your goal. The whole objective with special ed is not to continue on special ed for their entire life. The whole objective is to get them as close to their peers so that we can eventually exit them from special education services. Do we have people at Wood that do have IEPs for reading, writing, and math, but they're on a tier 2 program for behavior? Absolutely. And those people, we go to our student resource, Katie, huh? At-risk teacher. At-risk teacher. She works with them. They're brought up at SIT. And it's a collective plan of how can we get their behavior back to where it needs to be at tier 1. And we work on a plan and implement it. And when the plan does or does not work, we go back and revise and start over again.
Pointed at Sherry because your question reminded me of a conversation we had 2 years ago where you were, I think you were in one of your classrooms for students with behavior IEPs, and you were talking with Boots, and you asked her, like, Boots, where's your PBIS? And you said that like a light bulb went off, because you're right, there has been in the past this confusion about, well, and it's been a growing process over the last 5 years in the district, that understanding that concept of a student with an IEP is a general education student first. And PBIS tiers are a support. So how are we going to say that a student with an IEP doesn't get those supports that a gen ed student gets? And so you're right. I think that's the next steps for us, is building that learning, that understanding. It's not that PBIS is new to the district this year, but one thing we haven't talked about with PBIS in the past in our previous trainings is, what does that look like to a classroom teacher, a general ed teacher? What are they doing differently in a PBIS system? Which I think is great that you guys have brought in, like what Wood has done. I think you guys are very far, like, as far as like implementing what does that look like. But that also includes those conversations about, like, how does a tier plan interact with an IEP? And when do we need to convene the IEP to mention that tier plan? And that's all future learning for us.
I would share that we do have classrooms. We have classrooms that have students with behavior goals primarily. They struggle to be successful in the general population a lot of the day. But all of those classrooms also have some type of PBIS plan, system, organization. Those students are working on some very basic skills, sometimes like language. And that's a part of their system. That's about being responsible or, keeping safe and that type of thing. So every single classroom operates with Wood Rocks at Wood. But that was new learning for us at Wood just a couple of years ago. Wood has always had some type of program support for students with behavior goals and IEPs. That's just a place that we ended up going to last year when I asked the question, because it was, I don't know, like getting hit on the head with an anvil. What are we doing here? And we just accept it. All kids are general ed kids first, and they're all going to do it.
I was, let somebody else go first, and I follow up later.
I appreciate the fact that you have individualized it so much, because when somebody said Boys Town, there was no individualizing. It's like, here it is, and you're all going to do the same thing. And as a classroom teacher, I don't want to do the same thing. I want to do my own thing in my own way under that umbrella. So I'm glad that you have individualized so much of it. That's a great thing. Emotional safety, the district was putting that out, but I remember the questions that we went over last fall, and a lot of emotional safety questions dealt with social media, bullied on social media. How do you address that in school when that is really outside of our school time? So how do you, I looked at the question and thought, I'm not sure we could ever fully address it, because they emotionally safety in the building, but not when it comes to that internet.
I'm not sure that we didn't bring that poster, but we actually have a responsible, organized, keep safe for social media, technology, being online. We have bought into this in just about everything we do. We went to the pandemic. How are you responsible in being healthy? How are you, are you using hand sanitizer when you're walking through the hallways? So social media is a challenge, I think, for all of us, because it's 24/7. We do a lot of education around social media, technology, that type of thing. But we hit it from, you need to be responsible, you need to be organized, you need to be cooperative, you need to keep safe, and we teach.
And I mean, I don't want to speak for the committee at this point because we haven't made that decision, but in my head, how does this form like our bully prevention program for the district and the type of training we want to make sure is in place and being regularly utilized? And so that'll be a topic of discussion. We have Olveus, but I personally feel like that's something that we need to energize again. And it's a nice correlation because a lot of that emotional safety is around bullying, being left out, social media.
Director Potts?
Yeah, I'm curious about the Friday things because like they fill the puzzle or they filled in the pinwheel, what's the frequency with which they achieve that?
Go ahead, puzzle.
Okay. It can depend on the week. At the beginning of the year, we were filling that puzzle a lot more than we were here towards the end of the year or middle of the year. I'm sorry, because, the students are new. They don't know each other as much. They don't have a whole lot of conversations in the classroom. So everyone's on task because they're still shy, still in that phase. But I would say we fill it at least once every other week as a class because, and it's nothing that I'm doing. It's just when they go to my room or Ms. Rawls' room or Ms. Thomas's or Ms. Davison's, they know the expectation because it's the same in every classroom, and they know that that's what they have to do. So I don't lose a lot of instructional time. I would say that on the day that they have it, sometimes they just choose bring in a snack day. So they all bring in a snack. Maybe I'll bring in one, and then we still have our instruction that day. If they're going to choose that they want to have Chromebook time, it's not going to be the whole period for their Chromebook. We're going to start our focus lesson like we do every day, maybe give a little instruction, and the last half of the class will be their Chromebook time.
Is that the same in the science class?
We vote as a class on what they want to do when they fill their periodic table. And so for mine, they get about 5 points a day. And so on my periodic table, there's 100 points. And so once they fill that, the first time I'll give them a choice. I'll say, okay, do we want a snack day or do we want 10, 15 minutes of free time? Or they vote as a class on what they kind of want to do as a reward. And I also kind of look at to see, it could be, I'm trying to think. Last time what we did, we just filled one of them is, they all, I brought in like just a snack, I guess, on that one. It just depends on what the class wants overall.
For my art color wheel, there's 12 colors in the color wheel, and I'm a quarterly class, so it usually takes them about 3 weeks to fill their color wheel. But it is reminded every day, hey, don't forget you want to earn your wedge for your wheel because you want to get to this incentive if that's what you're wanting. And then one of mine about the lost instruction time is sometimes when they can't go outside, they'll choose bingo day. And that's not like your normal bingo with like B6 and I19. I make it more individualized to art where they fill in their own bingo card and they can't like put their pointer on if they don't know what the answer is. So it's more like a review while still playing a game. So like if the thing says primary colors and I give the clue red, yellow, blue, they have to know what that correlates to in order to fill that in. So it's kind of hitting both sections.
So your color wheel is bigger than Roy G. Biv.
Yeah. They have to know the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors.
The reason I'm asking is because I know you all have pacing guides, and I didn't want the impression to be left that Friday's movie day and little Freddie could have 5 of his classes where he's hit the mark and he's binge watching all day. No, I think it is important to know that the rewards are segmented and that the pacing guide is still driving instruction.
Dr. Beck?
I appreciate you, Director Potts, for pointing that out. I always make the joke when my son says they had game day or movie day. I'm like, I got to talk to somebody on the school board about this curriculum, man. So a little bit more serious question. I'm curious to know your experiences with, one of the things that we've had problems with as a district, as have many districts, is disproportionality in identifying behaviors. And the first step is identifying, being consistent in identifying majors and minors and things like that. What kinds of things are we doing to make sure that what we are identifying as majors and minors are not disproportionately singling out certain types of behaviors and are equitable to people from all sorts of different backgrounds? I guess.
Yeah.
So we have a task team that just finished up some work on revised guidance about what constitutes a major and a minor. So what behaviors more objectively and giving more clear guidance than what the state offers us. The state does collect data on that, on what referrals are put into our systems. And so they start with there are, I want to say 19 behavior types that you can choose to list. And so, yeah, we had one of those committee things. And again, like you talked about, mission and vision statements, I don't know how many hours we have sunk into trying to wordsmith those and make sure that they're, like you said, that they can be applied equitably. The other thing to talk about is that, that is an ongoing process for us. That's a growth area. And what I mentioned about the new, the revised supporting and responding to students' social, emotional, behavioral needs now explicitly incorporates cultural and linguistic responsiveness and the Shiraki-Hawley's framework of VABing, the validate, affirm, build, and bridge. And so that is going to be, as we move forward with Pbis, that's going to be another big topic for learning. And again, it can't stop with Leadership Academy. It has to get down to classrooms. And it has to get down to us starting to build the skills where we can see the assets students are bringing to the classroom with us. And sometimes those are assets that work in a different context, and they're not working here. And so how do we validate that student as being a smart and productive and capable person, and then try to use that asset so that we're turning that towards academic success? But yeah, it's a work in progress. It is.
It's an interesting question, Dr. Beck, so I'm going to test my teachers because we just shared Q2 data with them. I wonder if they remember what our number one category was for referrals.
Oh, I got it. Skipping class.
Correct. So the number one referral written, the most referrals second quarter were written actually for skipping class. The other thing, I don't know if you recall, but they just mentioned when we were looking at the expectations rubric, I literally handed them their individual data. I didn't look at it, okay? They are reviewing it, they're taking a look at it, they're reviewing their practices. But as he mentioned, the real important part to getting down to that data is actually getting down to the individual classrooms, reviewing that data, taking a look at that data, and letting it impact classroom practice. And this group of teachers, more than them, the building at Wood, they are getting to that place. We share grade level data outwardly in our building. Nothing's a secret. We post it. They know it. They know the classrooms. They know the kids. They know the teachers. Behavior data is very personal to teachers and kids. but we are starting to share that at Wood as well and let it impact our practice. And our district has a long way to go on that, but we're all, I think, every building's starting to work in that direction.
You know, something else I want to add as a kudo to Wood is just after, I can't remember, it was the first try of data, one of the teachers during the PD actually raised the question when they were looking at the data in regards to defiance and insubordination. And the teacher raised the challenge of saying, is it possible that, or are we looking at the data to discover if it is possible that certain students are being responded to differently with that data than others? And specifically, do we consider some students arguing or disagreeing when we think of defiance and insubordination so they don't get tagged, but we consider other students fighting and being disrespectful? And what do those students look like? And so looking at those that individual data, I'm sure that Wood is going to continue to go into that of determining, do we have some students that are considered to be disagreement because of what they look and sound like? And do we have other students that sound scarier and louder and more insubordinate and defiant because of what they look like and sound like? So I think that was awesome because it was in that building where that challenge was raised around that data. So it was a great discussion.
Well, thank you guys for talking about that. And I think it's one of those things that it's not comfortable and, you know, we don't necessarily feel comfortable acknowledging it, but hearing that teachers themselves are willing to think about it. I mean, just thinking about it is a step in the right direction from where we used to be. And so I appreciate that. And all the stuff you've shown us today, I really appreciate you guys coming out.
President Gosa, did you have anything to add?
I do not. I think everybody asked a lot of great questions and beat me to it. I do want to thank everyone for this awesome presentation and the slideshow with the pictures from the things you have up in your classrooms. It is always nice to hear not only from, administrators or building principals, but also the teachers that are in there doing it. So greatly appreciate you all taking time to go over this stuff with us tonight, and great presentation. And thank you to the student board members for wanting to actually come to a committee of the whole and participate in your point of view too. We do appreciate that.
Linda?
Director Passion.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for your dedication. I really appreciate it. When we talk about the youth leadership teams, they're talking about expectations. And with PBIS, you're talking about expectations. And maybe it's already being done, but is there a way that you're going to make use of these youth leadership teams to add to or to help with PBIS?
So the members I've brought here are teachers, and my youth leadership team has my at-risk teacher and my 2 counselors that work with that group of students. And so they work with the kids, obviously, but I'm not even sure if they know who all the student leaders are. But yes, we meet with them usually twice a month, and we review with them the Wood Rocks and what's going on. They give us lots of input. They like to tell us they think it would be more responsible on our part if we give more time at lunch, and we have some fun with that. But they do outline. We can say to them and say, in fact, as we will. Our number 1 referral was skipping. So, what's going on with that? Help us with that. How can we address that? How can we help kids be more responsible? And we do. We talk to them and we get their feedback and their input on that.
Yeah, and I think they'll be a very good resource for you as far as implementing your PBIS. Yep. And call it what you want, peer pressure or whatever. But I think and that they may be also able to help make the transition from elementary to junior high. So
I'd just like to say I was at Wood observing your youth leadership team, and they were very focused on the student-to-student relationship, and we're all excited about doing some planning to help that out. So yes, it was good to watch them.
Anyone else have anything to add? Director Gordon?
Yeah, I know that today was mostly about tier 1. Will you guys be back to discuss tier 2 and tier 3? Okay, because I have questions, but I don't want to ask them at the wrong time, so I will leave that for next time.
Anything more? I think we're all excited to have our next update on it. Thank you so much for an awesome presentation.
Again, thanks to Wood for coming and being present with us today. So very much appreciated to hear the voice of the practitioners. Jake and your team, thanks for putting that together. Much appreciated. Up next, we have our Essa Report with us tonight. We have Bill Schnaden and Heather Harland, and really our entire cabinet. Jamie, if you would, and Jamie Winesrell as well. So if you guys wouldn't mind coming on up. What we would like to do is give you an update of where have we been, where are we, and where are we going. And we have a proposal for you tonight for your first viewing, utilizing our ESSER dollars as an incentive. Oh, and we have Tammy Conrad with us. She is a principal at Washington, and she's getting her superintendent's endorsement, and this is part of her hours to assist with our ESSER committee. So I forgot, Tammy comes to all of our meetings anyway, so I forgot about that. Sorry, Tammy. That being said, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Brenda, you going to run our slides for us? Okay. The first slide just shows us what we're here to talk about tonight.
Bill, would you like the board members to hold their questions at the end or ask them periodically throughout the presentation?
Well, we have a slide at the end that says questions.
All right, so
Wanna wait till then? That's why we brought Heather along. So.
If you wouldn't mind, let's write down our questions and ask them at the end. Bill's presentation is 76 slides long, and he's going to get through all of them.
I know better. I've sat through a few of these. The ESSER funding, as most of you know, but I think it's really important for those that are watching us know that Congress set aside about $30 billion in the CARES Act. And of that, about $13.2 billion was supposed to go bring some relief to elementary and secondary schools. And that's what ESSER stands for, is Elementary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. So you always hear us talk about ESSER. It's $13.2 billion out of that 30.75 that came our way. And these are basically grants that were awarded to the state, who turned around and gave it back to the local agencies and said, use these funds to relieve your efforts around COVID-19. Slides. There are about 4 different funding streams over the time that have brought dollars into our buildings, and they're referred to as GER, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. The next slide will show us what each of those are. This is the amount of money that showed up to Davenport in those. Total amount received, somewhere around $74 million. And the next slide will show us that the GER, the Governor's Emergency Relief Funds, the district's allocation on that ended up being about $720,000 after the non-public's equitable share was taken out of there. And we primarily used these dollars for hotspots, broadband, internet services for students who were qualifying and didn't have those services in their homes. And then once those things were done, we were free to use these GER dollars for student devices such as tablets, laptops, and Chromebooks. So it was a communication piece. ESSER 1 then was the first allotment that came. That ended up being about $3,700,000 minus the non-public. They got a piece of this equitable share also. And the directions or the focus on those dollars was really, if these dollars are eligible, or what you're doing in these other federal programs like ESSA, IDEA, Carl Perkins, McKinney-Vento, those are activities that you should be able to maintain and keep going and use these dollars. You're good to support those kinds of initiatives with these dollars. And then ESSER 2 was the next set of dollars that came along, and that was about $21.5 million. And again, it was continue to support those responses under ESSA, IDEA, Carl Perkins. And over the years, I know you know a lot about those federal funds, and I know Heather comes to meetings all the time and fills you in on how those dollars are being spent. And also, you could use these dollars for facility repairs and improvements, inspections, testing, maintenance, repair, air quality. And we're going to talk throughout this presentation a little bit where some of those dollars have gone. And then the third batch of money that came, the next slide, was the ESSER 3, Brenda. There you go. That was about $48 million. It's hard to know what's coming up. That was about $48 million. And again, continue supporting those federally funded activities that have all been approved. They all have a stringent list of guidelines around how you can use those dollars. But this time it came with a little caveat that said 20% of that $48 million has to be spent on best practices around lost learning, or helping with the idea that kids are missing out on learning. And that little parentheses number is approximately $9 million, a little more than that 9.6 that we've kind of put over here to say those dollars have to be used on lost learning. Some of the assurances that have went into this program when it got started and was making sure that the stakeholders had opportunities to give input on how these dollars would be spent. I've been trying to get, and I'm going tomorrow night to an LCAC meeting to share with them this proposal and hear their thoughts on it. Superintendent Schneckloff has taken this to the district student achievement team where he did some brainstorming with leadership about how these dollars would best serve our kids. They likewise had administrator or principal meetings where they did that. I know that you've been involved with labor management and conversations around how these dollars could best serve our kids. Community partners meet now that the pandemic, or now that they're back in session. I'm going to join them on February 23rd. And then tonight's presentation actually to the Board of Education's Committee of a Whole are all ways that the stakeholders can find out and learn about these dollars. We have to provide opportunities for the community to give input. And these are the ways that our committee has identified as opportunities for input. You could certainly attend a school board open forum and share how you feel about these dollars or what you'd like to see happen with them. We do have a survey that we sent out, and I'm going to share that, a little bit of that feedback with you. There's an opportunity on our website, as you're well aware, that people can comment and give feedback, and they bring that to our committee. DEA's labor management group has met with HR and shared some of their concerns and given input. And then, of course, the community partners meetings, which are held with John Borders' group. Some of the actions that we've taken up to this point with the ESSER funds are on the following slides. We did a survey back in August where about 69% of our respondents were parents, 22% were teachers, about 1,500 people responded to the survey. Brenda, the next slide tells us a little bit about the outcomes of that. There you go. There was two questions basically around the priorities of how these dollars should be spent, and then what did you feel were some of the best uses when addressing lost learning. The top three priorities were the call for additional staff and more academic support, addressing kids' social and emotional supports. I think, wow, what a nice lineup with what we just heard earlier from the Pbis committee, and then activities to support special services and ELL. Some of the best uses of addressing lost learning, or where this survey suggested, was the idea around intervention, spend the money on intervention, extending outside of the school day, tutoring, summer school, et cetera, and then helping to address the students at risk or dropout. Next slide, please. The district leadership team, which we refer to as a DSAT, then determined from those surveys and their data that that the social, emotional, and mental health needs of our students was surfaced again, along with looking at ISAS data, the Conditions for Learning survey, which Dr. Klipsch talks about. How did the students fill that out? What did parents think? They looked at literacy screening and progress monitoring data. They looked at the math screening and progress monitoring. All these are sessions that go through at the DSAT to help drive how these dollars will be spent, and of course, behavior referral data. Then the slide is basically the same thing, but it's saying that then they went through and looked at all of those data points by subgroups and separated it out by the categories of subgroup. Next slide, please. The following groups surfaced as those being most impacted by COVID-19, and we should be focusing our attentions in that direction. Students from low-income families, students of color, English learners, students with disabilities, students experiencing homelessness, children and youth in foster care, and our migrant students. This again was talking about the 20% that needs to be set aside out of the ESSER $3 for lost learning in order to accelerate learning through evidence-based interventions. I oftentimes talk about best practice, and it's really evidence-based interventions in literacy, math, and social-emotional health. The committee that meets on a regular basis is myself, Kevin, your CFO, Heather, our budget specialist, who does a lot of work with a lot of our federal programs and really bleeds her knowledge into this a lot. Jamie from HR, Tammy Conrad, as TJ mentioned, is a principal and also a member from the administrative team on this committee. And then Danielle, the administrative generalist in the central office here, works with us also. Next slide, please. When there's an idea for a funding request, this is kind of the process. We created a Google form, if you will. So the requester will submit a proposal via Google form. Then my committee meets and we review that request. These are the 3 bullets that kind of drive our work. We want to ensure that it aligns with the plan requirements. We want to make sure that it's addressing what it is the plan says it's going to address. We oftentimes are seeking more information, saying, well, this is a good idea, but what about this? Or how do you plan to sustain this in the absence of these funds? And then when we have a request that's ready to go, I go to the cabinet on Mondays and bring the new request forward. And oftentimes they'll send me back to get more information, or if they approve it, the request will end up either approved, pending, or denied. And then I get back to the requester and share with them the decision of the cabinet and what new information might we need, or that this request has been denied for these reasons, or it's been approved. So we get a hold of Heather, they get them account codes, and they can begin to spend these dollars, if you will. Next slide. This is the kinds of things that are on that request, and I'll paraphrase it a little bit. The very first thing that our committee asks, and we ask the funder, is your request in response to COVID-19? Because if it's not an appropriate use of these funds. And so we would return it right back and say, that's a really good idea. You should go talk to, I'm trying to think of our fundraiser, our grant writer, Nikki DeFaw. And oftentimes Nikki will pick it up then and look for other funding streams that might be appropriate for that request. When we first got started, this was really, it was a struggle to try to wrap our head around the enormous amount of money and all the requests that we were hearing about. So these 5 buckets really drove our work. And it's the idea of early literacy, social emotional health, health and safety, online learning or credit recovery, and learning loss. These were the 5 buckets that the cabinet, with the work with the superintendent, established as saying that if we spend our money in those buckets, we're going to be addressing our citations, we're going to be moving our group forward, and we're going to be staying in line with the work that we need to be doing. We're not going to go out here and create something more that we need to do. So we align each of the funding requests to a bucket. Oftentimes they'll address more than one of those buckets. They give us a brief description of what they want to do, the timeline. Does it include contracted staff? Are there evidence-based practices that align to your request, or is this just a good idea? And how are you going to measure the effectiveness of this if you are granted this money and this goes into place? And then how are you going to, this is the big one that gets everybody all the time, how are you going to sustain this when these ESSER dollars go away? Because if it's about hiring people, then you've got to have a plan, or we're going to find ourselves in a similar situation. Next slide. Heather, when she codes these expenses, then takes our bucket list, if you will, and they fall into these categories that I think the state guides her work, and they line up really quite well. Health and safety, technology, at risk, the continuity of services, learning loss, and remaining funds. Some of the things we've done in health and safety, and these are just kind of a splattering. Did that sheet go out in your packet about that we used at finance? Did you get it? Okay. So that's a little more detail, but some of the things we've done in health and safety of PPE, of course, mask, vaccine clinics, distribution, some staffing for contract tracing, the current HVAC systems. We've bought custodial supplies for cleaning and disinfecting, signage, those plastic guards that are all over everywhere. Next slide. In technology, some of the big things have been hardware and software connections, Chromebooks, Zoom, other licenses for work so that teachers can work or kids can work from home, hotspots, Lexia, webcams, microphones, and we even pay for some technology support because of all the additional tech work that comes. At-risk supports, we've done things with homeless transportation, supporting the work of Pbis or behavior supports, some nursing overtime, restorative justice supports have been increased, and certainly reading teacher supports at the elementary level have been increased also. And the continuity of services are those things that needed our help. I call it the bailout. Instructional materials got lost, so we've got to replace them. You remember the food and nutrition relief that needed to happen because of their deficit. Early childhood needed some help earlier in the year. Shaney's after-school program needed support to keep it running and not die in the vine. And then probably one of our bigger expenses is our online programming that we refer to as Edgenuity. It's the company and the contract that provides online programming for kids. Next. The learning loss is, again, this idea that 20% of those ESSER III dollars, or about $10 million, needs to be spent, and some of the ideas that are being proposed right now and are kind of bouncing back and forth for more information. It's summer school programming at both the elementary and the summer and secondary level, academic supports within the classrooms, elementary literacy teachers that have been added, student support liaisons for online learners. Those are supporting the kids that are taking the online instruction at home. And then, of course, we've put credit recovery supports at all of the high schools in order to support those kids that are falling behind. And those all fall in that learning loss category. The remaining funds is we as a district are committing to use the rest of those ESSER III funds in the following way. And it basically is the way we were told to spend them. You know, you can, activities that are authorized by the ESEA, the IDEA, Carl Perkins. We'll work to coordinate preparedness and responsiveness efforts with the state, training and minimizing the spread of any infectious disease. Next slide. Training, that's the same one again. Purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean, we'll continue to do that. Repairing and improving school facilities to reduce the risk of a virus transmission. Improving or inspecting indoor air quality. Talked about that this morning at our meeting. Addressing the needs of low-income families, children with disability, English learners, ethnic and racial minorities, homelessness, foster care, and developing and implementing systems to improve preparedness and response. So in the event of something in the future, we'll have some actions in place and some best practices that we'll be able to go right to. Planning again for long-term closures, providing meals and technology for kids or students that are online learners, purchasing technology, providing mental health services. These are all things that will continue to be done with those dollars and projects that have already been started this year. Next slide. These are just some bullets that I thought were, when you think about how we got started and what we've done, these are some things that I feel like really need to continue. One is I think we need to go back out and survey our families and our community in line with DSAT again about how things are going. We need to review the data on the places the things we've already funded to see if they are in fact having any kind of a positive impact on kids. And that third bullet was just, I think it's important to know that when this committee approves something through their ESSER request, it's only for 1 year. From the very beginning, Kevin talked to us about chunking that, if you will, $60 million into chunks of 20 million, so we don't spend everything in year one and then something bigger or better comes along down the road. So we've kind of built a little budget around that idea of staying in that 20 million. Doesn't mean you can't go over or under, but we kind of thought this first year, let's stay in that $20 million range and only give approval for 1 year. And then if they are showing success and it has been a good use of the dollars, come back again. The request is very simple, 1 page, and ask for those dollars again for year 2 and perhaps for year 3. And that's that last bullet that's on there. Again, the just as kind of a one-shot look, the ESSER carryover was about $17 million. Our remaining balance in ESSER 2, because of taking out what we're projecting to spend, is about 11.5. Then ESSER 3 came in with 48 million. We pulled 10 million off of that for the lost learning projects. So you took 37 and the 11, and you've got about $50 million plus the lost learning dollars for your district over the next 3 years to address those kinds of things that were in the plan. Heather does she does all of the accounting work that goes along with this, and so I appreciate her coming tonight to be able to help you with answer any of those questions you might have. And then Jamie and I have spent a lot of time on HR issues around ESSER funding because of sustainability mostly, and how do we serve the need that comes this way, but make sure that it's not going to be hanging on after the dollars are gone. So,
And real quick, with Heather being here, she is definitely the gatekeeper. She's so well versed in ESSER, and at our committee meetings, she knows the language inside and out, and to ensure that every decision we're making, because there's always that threat they can come in and audit us. So if we get audited and they feel that it didn't meet the requirements of ESSER, we would be obligated to pay that back with our general funds. So it's really important, and that's why we try to be the gatekeeper, but Heather is definitely the star on the team.
We also took this presentation to the Finance Committee and had a more itemized list and kind of got into the weeds with the Finance Committee. So I'm sure they'll have comments as we move forward over that as well.
Any questions?
With this kind of money, we better have results, or we just should hang it up. Because all we ever do is simply, we don't have enough money for this, we don't have enough money for this, we don't have enough money for this. Now we got more money. It's not real money because they're borrowing it, but we got money. It better have results. And I'm looking at you, but I'm just saying, collectively,
Yeah.
with this kind of cash, if we don't make any impact, then we're in the wrong business.
I preach that all the time to Mr. Schneckloff, that this is such an opportunity to do something different, to get a different result. And I'll be honest with you, the biggest challenge that I think that we see is that oftentimes we're looking for people. We're looking for smaller class sizes, more interventionists, more teachers, and that's been a real struggle. It's been a real struggle. And then the other side of that is you put them on staff, and then how do you address this 3 years down the road? Jamie and I think we did the coolest thing we did with ESSER, I think so far, was those interventionists, where they created the need to support the kids that were falling behind in reading, and we build it as a win-win. She needs teachers, and we need to start recruiting teachers now for the future. So we knew that if we hired these, I think we put 12.75 in this budget. We knew if we found 12 teachers and they were going to help with intervention now, we knew we'd have a job for them in next year or the year later. And so it was a way of getting out in front of recruiting to me, those are the kinds of ideas that need to keep coming out of these ESSER funds, where the district wins, the kids win, and and we got the supports in there. But I agree. I say it about summer school. I know Lisa's got the big challenge of putting together summer school, but it's got to be different. We know what we've done before and didn't work, so it's got to be different, and you got to find a way to get them there, and you got to find a way to make it. It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. But there's a lot of sites too, and it's really fun to go on. There's projects all over the country, and they're doing some really cool stuff. Individual contracts with kids, where you contract a teacher on the side, and they work with that kid individually. I talked a little bit about that on Friday with Jamie, but there's a lot of good ideas out there. It's wrapping your head around it and staying. Well, as we talked, that's why those buckets were so important, because you couldn't really start spinning off on something else while there were still citations that needed to be addressed and a focus on the work that we were doing. So how do you take that focus, those ideas, and try to get some impact? Those are the challenges. I just would say, I know you were looking at me, but I would just say that I'm chairing this committee that's funneling this. It's really your cabinet that's making the decisions on which projects to move forward with, and their principals are going to them to say, hey, I've got an idea, and then they're supporting it and bringing it forward. And so the cabinet meetings get interesting. We have a lot of things that are pending because we can't get the right answer yet, or we don't want to make the wrong decision.
Dr. Austin?
Well, a couple of things that Bill brought up. We had a lengthy discussion at Finance Committee, and again, it's the sustainability. We just can't create a bunch of positions and then after not having end game to it. And then the other thing, you brought up summer school, and again, I'm just using this as an example. I was frustrated with, what happened last year with summer school and the participation. And so, I agree with what you said, something different has to be done. Because if we don't get these kids in school, then I don't see how we improve early literacy. Bruce and I were visiting ahead of the meeting. I think when it comes to summer school and using a lot of ESSER dollars there, we need to put some teeth into it. And it's like, for one example, these kids don't go on to the next grade without attending summer school if they've been identified as needing help. That would be one example, but something definitely different has to be done when it comes to summer school. We get criticized for our test scores and, our early literacy, but if these kids don't come to school, then how does the school district improve with these kids? So they have to be in school in order for that to have any results. And so the only other thing I would say is just throwing money at something is not going to cure it. There's got to be a plan with it. And you got to remember, you keep talking about, we've got all these ESSER dollars. We got all this free money. No, it's not free money. It's taxpayer dollars. We are all paying for it. Okay. And so it needs to be used wisely. And again, there has to be an end game so that we are not stuck with affecting our budget down the road.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate that you're acknowledging the issues. I don't know what happened or what the summer school problems were, but I appreciate that you're acknowledging the issues and you're wanting to resolve them. You have such enthusiasm to get things turned around or improve them and how you want them to be. I think it's really important to acknowledge flaws or things that you can improve on, even if it's meeting where you need it to be, but there's always room for improvement in everything, not even just summer school. And I think it's important that everybody acknowledges that and you have such enthusiasm about your jobs and what you want to do for our school district.
So, one question. It's 20% has to go towards lost learning. Can we spend more than that?
Yes, and we're
Okay,
going to.
because the way I looked at this one slide, all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, we got to spend more than that. Not necessarily, I guess. It's not just about throwing money. I know I've heard, lots of crazy ideas, and I'm thinking, well, why don't we just have a full school year? But then I realized, that doesn't work for everybody. I've heard people do like a summer camp, and so it's school, but it's got fun stuff involved. The kids get, I don't know, movies in the afternoon or double recess or I don't know, whatever. Something that makes it different, and you call it something different. I think, and I don't know if we have done a survey as to, did we do a survey before summer school last year and find out if people would actually attend? Did we do a survey after finding out why people didn't go? That might be a thing to do. Find out what would incentivize you or encourage you to send your child to extra schooling.
I think we are getting down a path where we're going to start talking about an individual topic. So I know Lisa's team's putting together a summer school proposal. How about I add that to the agenda planning committee to bring here for feedback? And then that way we can see it. It is exactly what you're talking about. It's beefed up. It's for everyone. It's pushing and enhancing and the tier 2 and tier 3 work that we have too. It's a big lift and quite the investment. And so how about I add that to an agenda item through the agenda committee? Thank
I
you.
do have a more general question. So we have 3 years to spend the money, is that right? And what's the turnaround time for people applying to you guys for funding? How long does it take for you to say, yes, this is a go, no, this is...
We usually, if we get it before Thursday morning, then we take it that Monday to, the following Monday, it goes to cabinet. And if things are in order, it could be approved, and then Heather gives them an account code on Monday afternoon, and you could go. But there's an awful lot of digging that goes on after the first proposal comes out.
So I'll go into that. Right now, we are so focused on the implementation plan that we have now. Everything that, we can do anything we want. We just can't do everything we want. So we're still in a spot where we have to stay focused. If you tell a 3rd grade teacher that now you have available to you reading tutoring after school, math tutoring after school, you have all these things that you can sign up to do, well, they still have to be professional developed on the materials that are there. There has to be logs and things developed for those hours. And so we have to, the group of people back there have to align. Can we hire all of those questions? Can we hire the people or the resources there and decide to move forward? Because the last thing we want to do is knock our early literacy plan over by some of these initiatives. At the same time, recognizing that there's a lost learning need and we've got to move forward as well. It's just such an unbelievable time. If you were to take these dollars, set them in Director Potts' lap in his last 5 years of education, he would have been able to hire 30 teachers and come in, do intervention work. We'd be able to hire paras. We know how to do 1-year contracts. We know how to do those things. We can't find the bodies. It's the strangest thing. And to Director Potts' point, we've always needed more money to do the things that we need. Well, now we need more humans to do those things with a clear exit plan. Because we know how to build a program that sunsets. We know how to do that. It's just doing it. And we're prepared to do that. And I point at Jamie because we are prepared to do that. So those are some of the very unique challenges that when a proposal comes through, and we have to see what does it look like in 2024. Our goal, and if I am using my crystal ball, which has been, sometimes it's been broken lately, but if I'm using my crystal ball, they're not going to give us an extension on those dollars. They're for the pandemic. And to your point, they're dollars that they're not just going to let linger out there. The pandemic is going to come to an end, and we're always going to be dealing with it. But I believe that's what our minds are geared toward. Utilize those dollars to close the gaps as soon as possible. And honestly, we're looking at these dollars in a way that we can learn from. We've always wanted to beef up our credit recovery plan. And I look at Heather because we've been building that, but we never had enough money. Well, there's a full-time credit recovery lab in every single one of our high schools right now with a teacher and 2 SSLs. We've never been able to do that now. And so we will have enough data to look and see if that's necessary. 2024, when it sunsets, there's going to be a lot of great things going on in our district. Our long-range facility plan will be coming to life. Our great configurations will be coming to life. This will be sunsetting. We'll have some very clear programs that work for our students. And so done right, all those things should connect with one another. So those are some of the paths that are taken with the cabinet. And yeah, we do say no to things because it will knock over some of the key initiatives that we're having. But we also see some things and say, we're going to do that everywhere. And I'm very proud of the system that team has set up because it allows everybody to put something in. And so it gains the input from the stakeholders, from all. And if you remember when we were last December, which feels like 3 years ago to me. Last December, we were meeting with the DEA. We surveyed our families. We put together a plan, and then we paused to really get CRVP moving. So we were planned and ready for that. And so what we did is we picked that plan up, did some resurveying, reconnecting, picked that plan up, and moved forward. So I would say in terms of the cabinet, those are some of the key insights that we do when we're looking through some of those. So we do kind of pause them sometimes. We're trying to move them forward a little faster recently, but that's kind of the things that we're considering.
And I think TJ covered the sunset, that you asked how, what the timeline is on the money. So the majority of the funds that you're looking at here expire June 30 of 2024. So really you have the 22-23 school year and you have the 23-24 school year. So when you think about bringing staff in, that's a 2-year sunset. So I think those are always things that are on our minds. We have a great committee. They gave me kudos. I have to give them kudos too. Everything that we put out there, it's always on the back of our minds where they go next. And I think when I was here visiting with you guys about the modified allowable growth or the dropout prevention supplement, that was one of the conversations we had, was that there are things that are in here such as the credit recovery, the SSLs, that will eventually, we will notice that they are part of our dropout prevention program, and we'll start seeing how the other categorical funds kind of would be picking that up and carrying that forward.
Director Foster?
Bill, can you give us some examples of what you've approved here recently in the last 2-3 months or whatever?
Yeah, I think some of the big things were $500,000 for every building to replace library materials, which are desperately needed. And many things weren't returned during the pandemic, but it falls right in line with nonfiction at the elementary for early literacy, so they can build their collections. It's a good example. She came in she approached us with the directors for $1.5 million, and after conversation, it was like, well, let's split that a third. Let's go with $500,000 and see what that buys you and what kind of results you get from that, and then bring it back again next year for that. So that was a big one. Added a 0.5 restorative justice. Already was in place, but we added an additional 0.5 FTE to work with the kids in that arena. Edgenuity is a big expense. The Edgenuity online, as more kids went online, the cost, of course, goes up. There was a couple $1 million were set aside for that. About $1 million was used for preschool bailout. Most recently, we're talking about some tutoring supports for kids. We're talking about summer school. We're talking about preschool. What else was on there today? Or I think those were the biggies right now. We've done there's some ongoing safety and health things where kids aren't staying 4 in a hotel room. That came up again today. They're staying 2 in a room instead of 4 because of COVID. And so there was double the hotel expenses for swimming and show choirs and everything else that go out and do that. Those were some of the bigger ones. Some behavior supports put into buildings. There's a part-time counselor, a 0.5 counselor position was added out at one of the elementary schools a ways back. The study trips that were funded in the past by the foundation were picked up in their absence of being able to raise the money. Those are probably some of the bigger ones, Kent, that came about. Of course, the student support liaisons that are helping all of the kids that are online at each of the buildings. And then TJ mentioned the credit recovery at all the high schools. That's going on. 95% materials and training to support your early literacy initiatives. That was a big one.
Can I jump in, Bill?
Yeah.
On the tutoring, we did increase, understanding that most of our teachers are probably burnt out by the end of the day. And so we increased, as long as it's dealing with the lost learning, that it went from $28 an hour to $45 to try and incentivize that extra time outside of their normal day to help with tutoring.
Did that help to increase pay?
I don't have that.
Just
data.
happened.
Yeah. Well, we've had it like for summer school last year. It helped get more people, more teachers involved because you want your summer off, and when you hear $45 an hour, it's a little bit more enticing. So that's helped. We've got to look at some ways. Some of these tutoring programs were piloted. So there was one piloted at Truman to see if that was going to work and if they were seeing results, and then we can expand it. So some of these programs are early on coming out of the pilot phase.
When you say, sorry.
President Gosa, did you have any questions? I guess not. Director Gordon, go ahead.
Sorry about that. When you say tutoring, you say it's done by teachers. Does it have to be done by teachers? Is it really just additional learning that is not getting done in the classroom, or could
It's
it be
being
done
done
by
by teachers, and there's specific, like the math example was one of Lisa's curriculum specialists, the math curriculum specialist. I don't know, he got some additional math, put together like a curriculum for the teachers to utilize with the students because we're trying to do that direct tutoring to improve scores. So it's a certified teacher.
Okay.
It's based off the student needs. Lisa, would you like to jump in here? That's a good question because you don't want to say, well, you'll learn that after school, right?
The tutoring, who qualifies for tutoring? Is that what you're wondering specifically?
Specifically, I was wondering if we could make the dollars stretch further by using the dollars for training and programming of materials, but then use volunteers or parents or grandparents or I know that our volunteer situation is not excellent, but I think that we could do something to bring that in. But that's what I was asking is, does it have to be teachers, or is it just, could it be someone who could be trained to do the work? Because if it's after school, is it technically classroom work, you know?
I think Lisa would agree with me. I think that evidence-based practices piece, if you're using 20% dollars for lost learning, we have to show that this is a research-based practice. So the strategies that her math person has put together to use with the kids that are falling behind are going to be evidence-based strategies. And so, but there's a place where that could happen. Yes, we did that with 95%. The work they're doing with early literacy, the dollars for the materials and some of the professional development for that came from these dollars, and that'll be going on for a long time. Then, right? That's your point,
right?
And you've got that learning.
Lisa, you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, I missed what you said, TJ.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, just that we have a system for how we're identifying students. So it's students who had earned Fs in term 1 or 2 at the high school level. And then for students in grades 4 through 8 or 3 through 8, it would be students who are considered persistently at risk. So at winter and fall, they were not proficient in their grade level math screener. So those are the students that we are focusing on. We are trying to be efficient with those dollars in the sense that we've highlighted high leverage math materials that we want teachers to use in summer school too, so that these materials will be a common language and a common system for the students for after school tutoring, summer school, and then they can be used during math, MTSS during the school day, excuse me.
I just had a question regarding the credit recovery. Was that implemented because of COVID, or was that just like an overall failure rate before COVID that we needed to implement to like get people to pass?
So our failures due to COVID were
more
significant. And so typically we have a credit recovery area in each one of our schools with one person that oversees that throughout the district. This was putting somebody that oversees that at every school and managing those failures, and also extending from time to time. So if you have a student that doesn't that has a scheduling issue, they can take that as well.
Could we do something with this budget they're talking about to prevent having to use this credit recovery so frequently? Because I know at my school I've like become aware of it more, so obviously I think it's become a larger thing. So is there something that we could use this budget for to decrease the need for that, or just reduce the need for having so much support staff for that, like on a daily basis? Like with the tutoring, of course, that would help. Like, is there anything else they could do, like in the classroom before the student fails, besides tutoring?
So that is a wonderful point. We have 2 human beings that are leading that right now in our district. Lisa and Kim are working with our high school principals to describe exactly what does the multi-tiered system of support in the high school look like. They've had a couple of meetings, and we're going to utilize these dollars, to Director Gordon's point, to come out better on the other end of the pandemic with how we respond when students don't get or understand what we're trying to teach. They're in the initial stages of contracting, talking with the national expert for multi-tiered system of supports at the high school, and her name is Judy Elliott. Ooh, I got it right. So more to come on that, and I'm very excited about that work. I will tell you, one of the things in our district over the past that has been a problem is that we implement something and we try and make our high schools fit into something we implement. Well, we can't operate that way anymore, and we're not going to do that anymore. And this is one of those things that we got to go slow to go fast, and it's going to be very painful, but very rewarding as well.
Are we getting like student feedback on why they're struggling in their classes, or are they telling their principals like having that conversation, like what do you need to like succeed, rather than just the credit recovery? Is it like you need to have that talk with somebody if you have like an IEP or you have an issue with doing something else? So you're like being able to have those conversations, not just with the staff and saying, oh, I have so many kids that need tutoring, but are you asking the student individually what they need?
I will definitely follow up with that. And if you want to help me craft a couple questions, I'd really appreciate it.
Sounds good.
I think I have in my mind what you're trying to say, but if you would like to craft me a couple questions, I'll make sure those get delivered to the right people.
And I would just add that the student voice is a part of secondary MTSS implementation. So as we start working with staff around how to best meet student needs, you're exactly right. Student voice will have to be part of that equation so that we have both sides of that equation, so that we can best put frameworks and supports in place that actually are effective. So yes, that will be coming. Just like Mr. Schneckloff said, it's a long process. So we're just engaging in that learning now, but that will definitely be a key component for effective implementation. Good observation.
Director Poston?
Just a follow-up to some of the things Bill and Lisa said as far as identifying these students and trying to give them help. Is there any way of trying to tie in where absenteeism comes into play here? And I guess I'm going to ask for a board request at the next meeting as far as, can we get numbers as far as, absenteeism and how it relates to how the student is doing in school? I think some of the answers would be obvious, but just, what is our absenteeism rate in all schools, and, where we can use that and get some feedback from that.
I'm really glad you said, Green, sorry. You read my mind because that was going to be an ask to have the data pulled from first term to look at. I was at a UEN meeting. You all know what those are last week with our curriculum people that do a similar job to me. And we were sharing our ESSER stories and how we're using dollars across the UENs. And a lot of people were sharing about tutoring and credit recovery, which we're talking about tonight. And the two common themes were, one, they're struggling to get teachers to sign on to be the tutors. They are, for many reasons, not interested in working extra after school. And then one of the gentlemen in the group who, it's a district about an hour from here, he said he had just pulled his first semester high school data, and 99% of the students who attended 90% of school first semester. So remind you that 10% is considered chronically absent. That's the state definition, federal definition. But 99% of the students who attended 90% of first semester days of school received no Fs. So when you wrap your head around the dollars we spend converting Fs back into credits at the level we do, it's kind of mind-boggling to think, is it the chicken or the egg, to your point of, well, maybe if they were here more often, some of these students, then it wouldn't be enough. They'd have an opportunity to come in during their, every building calls it, I don't know what West calls it, but their intervention time, or, catch a teacher on his or her off block and make up some work. So yeah, it's definitely on our radar that's a high impact.
Going off of what Mr. Poston said, I noticed that a lot of my teachers and stuff, absences are a huge issue. A lot of people can tell you that if you show up to school, you're gonna be in the room, they're gonna be talking about what you're learning. The absences are the basis of all these issues. And I think that's something that really needs to be handled, because it's causing so many issues for so many people. It's causing the teacher to have so many kids on their prep, or the teacher might not have a prep. And it's just overloading everybody. I think that we need to really work on the basis of the problem, which is the absences. And we don't even need data to say, but it directly correlates to our credit recoveries, people, all these extra things that we need if we just got to the absence issues.
Amen, young lady.
What's your first name? Brianna. And if school was engaging for kids, they would go to school. If we were able to engage kids in their learning, then they'd want to be there. And if they want to be there, then they're going to, you don't want to miss the class with your teacher that gets you engaged and you have fun, or you think they're with it and know what's going on. And yeah, it's a big circle.
I would like to bring us back to the ESSER agenda. Some very passionate people in this room, I can tell.
Anyone else have anything there? I had a couple of questions. When the ESSER funds sunset, what happens to any remaining balances that are there?
ESSER is on a reimbursement basis, so we basically put the money out there and then we are reimbursed after the fact. So anything that is not claimed would just stay with the USDE, actually would stay with the Iowa DE because it filters through the state. It would become unclaimed money.
I would add that Director Postian has already made it pretty clear that there should be no money left on the table when this is over. So, I mean, I took that back from our last finance meeting for this committee to say, we got to keep working, you know, we got to make sure there's ideas coming. That's what Heather's for. She'll make sure that happens.
That brings up another point. I don't think we discussed it at finance committee meeting, but so we're being reimbursed from these funds. So Kevin isn't here, but maybe he'd be the one to answer it. So where are we taking these funds from until we get that money back? And does that create a problem from a cash flow standpoint after a while?
I will get you the specific answer for that, but that's why we have our reserves and
Okay.
In case that's not the right answer, I'll get it to you.
Okay, Bill, you had mentioned some of the requests being denied. About what percentage of that?
Very few.
1%, 0.5%.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of even an example of, maybe something that comes through that'd be more appropriate to go to, like to a PEPL fund, or, you know, it's a building issue. It's not so much, I'm trying to think what's even been denied recently. They've gotten, at the beginning, we call them red, greens, and yellows. At the beginning, we had reds. Now we got a lot of yellows sitting out there pending. And then the greens are the stuff that have been approved that I just shared and kind of moving. But we can sort those out. We also, Heather helped set up a spreadsheet, so we can even sort out how much money we're spending in each of those buckets. I thought that would be interesting. Like, how are the dollars being spent in early literacy? How are the dollars being spent around health and safety?
Now, you mentioned the non-public monies, that some of it goes to that. Can you explain what that is?
I'm sure Heather can, but those were the first two allocations. They got a certain amount of money out of those before we got our money.
Anytime we get federal dollars, we're required to have an equitable share to our non-publics. And so for the first two rounds under the CARES Act, we were required to take a portion of that and filter it to our non-publics. We stay the fiscal agent, but we basically are giving them the services. When ESSER 2 came, I think the federal government decided that was a big undertaking. If you think of a percentage of $48 million, it's a big undertaking because we still service. I still meet with them with Bill and our federal program specialists. So they, I think, knew that as a state, and our districts probably couldn't support that magnitude, so they took that equitable share away, and then they do that differently under Ian's dollars. So we are no longer, I mean, the equitable share we have left is fairly small, and our non-publics have until June 30 of 2022 to spend that, and then our equitable share portion will be distinguished at that point. So, but it's a federal thing. Every federal dollar that I work with has equitable share to our non-publics, so it's very common.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that and your presentation. Any other questions? You didn't have any? Okay, thank you so much.
We have one more portion to our presentation. Brenda, will you mind pulling it up? Yep. We see these dollars as an opportunity to invest in our future, to invest in our students, to invest in programs. Not that one, Brenda. Oh, thank you. To invest in piloting new programs. Well, what we would like to present to you tonight, it's time to invest in our staff. The pandemic has been incredibly difficult, and we have some of the most dedicated staff members, and you saw a bunch of them tonight. We've put together a proposal to move forward, to incentivize our staff to stay with us, finish this journey with us, continue to work hard, because they have every single day, all of our staff members, from our cooks to our custodians, to our budget specialists, to our administrators. They are working their tails off to close the gap, and we want to invest in them. So we would like to share a proposal with you tonight that does just that. It invests in the humans in Davenport School District. So Jamie, if you wouldn't mind walking us through this proposal, we would like to bring this forward at the next regular board meeting for a vote. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Brenda, can you go to the next slide, please? So looking at the COVID incentives, and also Lisa mentioned the UEN, HR has a UEN group throughout the state of Iowa. So looking up there, Bettendorf had recently gone out with an announcement on their incentives. They did $750 for all employees, excluding administrators, for those employees working 30 or more hours per week, and then $500 for those working less than 30 hours per week. Cedar Rapids did a one-time payment of $750. Iowa City did a stair step approach. Their administrators got $2,750, and that was split into two payments. Half was paid out in September of 21, and the other half will be in September of 2022. And then you can see their certified staff got $1,650. Their off-schedule staff got $1,000, and their Pbis food service maintenance and secretaries got $750. Council Bluffs did a $500 one-time payment. Marshalltown did 2 days of per diem for all employees, and then they also did a $100 vaccination incentive. Next slide, please. So what we are proposing is that all current employees that are in a paid status would receive the incentive that we'll get into. This does exclude the cabinet members, so I want to highlight myself and everyone sitting at the table over there would be excluded from this incentive. And then below that is the Iowa Department of Education guidance on recipients. And when I give Heather kudos, this is always the language that she lives by. So the funds that we would utilize would be ESSER 2, and just to show that we're staying within the parameters of the incentive pay, that we would be able to use that. And also verifying that we did want to include our administrators, like the building principals and our curriculum specialists, because they are also working their tails off. So we just, I know Heather did some double checking to make sure there wasn't anything in there excluding administrators. So we're good to go. Next slide. ESSER 2, I just highlighted it similar to, it's really what Bill presented on, but what we're able to do with the incentive pay is that's that highlighted area, other activities to maintain the operation and continuity of services. As TJ mentioned, our staff members have done a tremendous amount of lifting and working hard through this pandemic, but also we know that it's going to be continuing. It doesn't shut off anytime soon. So we want to recognize their efforts moving forward as well. So the incentive that we're proposing is a 3-phased approach. So phase 1 would be a $1,000 bonus for those, or incentive pay, for those employees working 30 hours per week or more, and $750 if you work less than 30 hours. And what we want to do is you'll see a gross amount on there. When we say that our employees are going to get $1,000, we want to pick up the additional expenses, so the employees get $1,000 in their check. That it's not, we'll pick up the taxes. The employees will get $1,000 in their check, or $750. And you can see for that phase 1, for the amount of staff that we have in 30 plus hours per week, that's almost $2.3 million and $73,000 for those working less than 30 hours. Next slide. So phase 2 is our retention phase. So this will be a little different depending on the employee group that people fall in. So teachers and administrators are required to sign contracts. So what we're proposing is that when a teacher and administrator signs their contract for next year, that they get the $500 bonus as soon as possible. For others that aren't on a contract, like our paras and secretaries, non-bargaining and such, that they would get, it's split up into 2. trying to dangle that carrot a little bit. So your first $250 would come at the beginning of the school year when you start, and then another $250 in the December timeframe, just because those employees are more at will and can leave anytime, whereas your other positions are contracted, so there's more parameters about leaving. You can see that that part of the phase is about $1.2 million. Next slide. And then phase 3 would be an additional $500 towards the spring of 2023. So you've hung in there with us throughout the rest of the year. So you'd get an extra $5,000. So in total between 500. Thank you. I'm getting really generous. Let's spend some money. Thank you. Oh, I was getting
Should
excited.
run for Congress.
I know. So what I was trying to say was, with that $500, that between in a year and a half, we would be, our employees would that are working 30 hours or more would be getting $2,000. And again, picking up any of the additional taxes on that. So you are, it's really important that they're, when we say $1,000 or 500 or another 500, that's what they're taking home. If you want to go to the next slide. So in total, the cost of all 3 phases is $4.7 million. And like I said, that would be coming out of ESSER 2. So when you looked at what Bill had earlier, where there was a little over $1 million in there.
11
11 million.
What did I say?
You said $1 million. It's late.
Okay. So a little under half of the ESSER $2 would be utilized for this incentive plan.
We took this to the finance committee, so before we dig into any questions, I'd like to get the feedback from the finance committee as we reviewed this, if you don't mind, as to advise the board.
First of all, I had suggested this last year, so I was really excited. I really believe that, like you said, they have worked their tails off through all of this, and to try to keep people from leaving, I think this is a great way to do it. Just so those out there listening to this, the only thing is this doesn't go through IPERS, but hey, cash in your pocket, so that's a good thing. I 100% support this.
Yeah, I echo what Karen said. This needs to be done.
Any additional questions, comments?
I think this is really important, and I know a lot of teachers that are thinking about leaving, and I think that this could really help them out. And specifically, I know two teachers with over 25 years of combined experience, and I think that this would help sway them differently. And I think that's important that we're considering how hard they're working, and I think that we should, I really agree with this whole thing, and I think that's great to give them that extra monetary things, but we also need to support them in other ways too, not just monetarily, and this is a good step in the right direction.
President Gosa.
He's probably shoving that computer off the desk in Wichita.
And I appreciate everything all of our staff members do as well. So this is a good thing. I will support this. Again, thank you, TJ and the team, for making this stuff work. I know we couldn't do it. It couldn't be done as soon as Karen wanted it done, but we did have some oversight issues that we had to work through to make things like this happen. So kudos to you all, Superintendent Schneckloff, for making this happen.
Is there anything more that anyone is needing for a vote on this issue? Okay, great. Great presentation. And kudos to all of them.
That concludes our presentations for the night. Vice President?
Okay, Director Potts?
So moved?
No. I was just starting. Not yet. Let's start with some reflections.
I'd give it to you.
Slow it down.
Oh, I can get picky now and say there's a motion on the floor.
I know.
I would say two things. I'm supposed to only have one, but I'll say two. The presentation of the Woods folks on the PBIS was very good, very enlightening. It was very, very good information for us to have. Second, I applaud us all for we're very good at spending other people's money, and this money incentive thing is just great.
Director Potson?
Well, again, the presentation from the Wood staff, that was awesome. But another thing is this young lady sitting over here, I'd like to adopt her.
Director Gordon?
I was so impressed with Wood's team, but mostly the one thing that stood out at me so much was that they had their whole staff involved in creating their mission and vision statements, and then they used that with students in mind to create their in-house PBIS system. And knowing that it came from everyone collectively working together means that there's buy-in from everyone in the building, and it's much more likely to be successful. And the students are going to see that everyone's on the same page. And I think that we would be, it would be a good idea to use them as a model for other buildings. So I was very impressed with that. Really good presentation.
Dr. Kleindrum?
I also really enjoyed seeing how they individualized the PBIS. Obviously, I'm thrilled that we are going to give this incentive, and I like the way it's broken out and how it's being given. And Brianna, if I'm ever gone, I think you could sit in my spot because you bring a perspective that we don't have, and you aren't afraid to ask us the questions and put it to us. So, great job.
Director Beck?
Yeah, pretty much everybody took all my stuff. But I echo the Woods presentation, and I'm happy to see that we're able to provide some financial bonuses to our employees. I think that's really important. And then I just want to point out that Bree isn't even here because she came here because Sarah wanted to come and couldn't come. And so she gets like triple points for doing this for a friend and being awesome in and of herself. So, but thank you for coming tonight, Bree. It's very nice to have you participate.
Brianna?
I thought it was really cool to see the Wood teachers. I always like when they, when anybody comes and presents to us. I think it's really nice. And going off of what Ms. Gordon said, the camaraderie in the building is really, really important. Nothing's going to work if not everybody buys into it, staff-wise, especially if the students aren't seeing the same initiative across the board. So I really appreciate that, and thank you all for being nice to me and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And if I've learned anything today, it's to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think it's really important. And yeah.
Thank you. President Gosa?
I think everybody already said everything. But Brianna, I really appreciate you reaching out and wanting to participate in committee of the whole meetings. I know every board president's workshop I'm on, we talk, or I bring up having student board members to get all of your perspective, and I think you bring a good perspective as well as your fellow student board members, so I think that's a huge thing. I appreciate the PBIS presentation. The Essa presentation, I do like the fact that when they're looking at things, we're looking at sustainability instead of just throwing things out there and seeing what sticks. And obviously, the bonuses for all of the employee groups, minus the cabinet, But again, great work, everyone, and I appreciate it.
Superintendent Sneckle?
It's very exciting to see some of the work being picked up from before the pandemic. Jake had been working with Marty over here to develop some of the rubrics, to develop some of the PBIS things. We were getting ready to just take off, and then the pandemic hit. And so it's very invigorating to see some of that work be brought back up in a systemic way. The second thing is I'm incredibly proud of this school board to be committed to have a student here. I have been to committee of the wholes for 10 years on and off, but really consistently for 5, and I've never seen a student board member at the committee of the whole. And, you know, it's very invigorating. And when I walk into her classroom, she's always engaged as well. And she's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Checking your engagement." So, Brian, thank you so much for coming and participating. And those are my 2 things for tonight.
Well, mine's pretty much.
Well, I wanted to piggyback before you closed us out, because then it's like the person that raises their hand right when the teacher's going to let them go. In case anyone's wondering, Bree stopped in my office today, and she said, "Is it a committee of the whole meeting or a regular meeting?" And I said, "No, it's a committee of the whole." She's like, "Are they presenting on PBIS? Because I'd really like to hear that and talk to it." So this was not an accident that she happened to show up. She knew what she was getting into. She was all in. So, yes. I just want to make sure everybody knew that.
Well, I really appreciate you for coming in your perspective, because like Director Kleindrome said, those are not things that we always think about, and to get to hear the student viewpoint, that was really refreshing, and you had a lot of great points to add. How those ESSER funds were being spent, that was really exciting. I was happy to hear that, and I'm always excited to hear presentations from Woods. They come up with some of the simplest, just stick to the wall type ideas, and I just always like what Sherry and her team does out there and how they present. So if nothing else,
Am I on?
you're on.
So moved.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded.